This was the heart of the millions of people in South Africa under the apartheid regime, where you could live, work, and work. The government dictated every aspect of life, enforcing strict racial segregation that permeated every corner of society. Black South Africans were forced to live in designated areas, often overcrowded and underdeveloped, far from the city of Johannesburg. They were required to carry passports before moving to any failure to produce these documents in time could result in arrest and imprisonment. This wasn't a discriminatory matter. This was South Africa under apartheid. The apartheid system was meticulously designed to maintain white supremacy and control over the majority of black populations. It was a system that dehumanized and disenfranchised communities, stripping them of their basic human rights and dignity. The laws were enforced with brutal efficiency, ensuring that the racial balance the system so brutally oppressive, it shocked the conscience of the The international community watched with horror as the South African government implemented policies that institutionalized racism and inequality. Protests erupted around the globe, with people from all walks of life demanding an end to the inhumane treatment of black South Africans. The global outcry was a testament to the universal recognition of the injustice being perpetrated. Apartheid, an Afrikaans word meaning separateness, was a system of racial segregation and discrimination enforced in South Africa from 1948 to 1994. The architects of apartheid sought to create a society where racial groups were completely separated, with whites enjoying privileges and rights denied to others. The laws were comprehensive, covering every aspect of life from education and employment to marriage and other communities. Imagine being told you're a second-class citizen in your own country. Imagine being denied access to the same public facilities, schools and hospitals as your white colleagues. Signs declaring whites only and non-whites only were a constant reminder of the systemic discrimination that permeated every aspect of life. The psychological impact of such blatant racism is profound, instilling a sense of inferiority and injustice. This was the reality of millions of blacks. They lived in a world where their potential was stifled despite the oppressive environment, the spirit of resilience and resistance never wavered. Communities found ways to support each other, creating networks of support and encouragement. The struggle for survival was a daily battle, but it was also a testament to the strength and determination of those who refused to be broken by the system. This wasn't just about separate benches or buses, it was about denying fundamental human rights. The right to vote, the right to own land, the right to an education, all stripped away based solely on the colour of your skin. The apartheid regime sought to control every aspect of life, ensuring that black South Africans remained economically and politically powerless. The denial of these rights was not just a matter of policy. It was a deliberate attempt to dehumanize and marginalize an entire population. The right to own land was one of the most egregious violations of human rights under apartheid. Black South Africans were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands and relocated to barren, overcrowded areas known as Bantustan or homelands. These areas were deliberately underdeveloped, lacking basic infrastructure and resources. The forced removals were often violent, with families being torn apart and communities destroyed. The loss of land was not just a loss of property, it was a loss of identity and equality. The right to an education was another fundamental right denied to black South Africans. The Bantu Education Act of 1953 institutionalized racial segregation of education, ensuring that black children received an inferior education compared to their white peers. Schools for black children were underfunded, overcrowded, and lacked basic resources. The curriculum was designed to prepare them for a life of service, with limited opportunities for advancement. Despite these challenges, many black South Africans pursued education with determination, knowing that knowledge was a powerful tool for their prosperity. A story of oppression, resilience, and ultimate the struggle against apartheid was long, marked by countless acts of Apartheid didn't emerge overnight. It was a slow, insidious process that took root over centuries, gradually evolving into the oppressive system that would come to define South Africa for much of the 20th century. It was the culmination of centuries of colonial rule and discriminatory policy. The seeds of apartheid were sown long before the term itself was coined, during the early days of European colonization. The seeds were sown during European colonization with the arrival of the Dutch East India Company in the 17th century. The Dutch settlers, known as Boers, established a foothold in the region, bringing with them a mindset of racial superiority and a desire to exploit the land and its people for their own gain. The discovery of diamonds and gold in the 19th century exacerbated racial tensions. These precious resources attracted a flood of European settlers eager to stake their claim and amass wealth. The indigenous African population was seen as a source of cheap labor, and the exploitation of these workers became a cornerstone of the burgeoning minefields. White minority rule tightened its grip, enacting laws to control and segregate the black population. These early laws laid the groundwork for the formal apartheid system that later be implemented. After the National Party came to power in 1948, they formalized and intensified racial segregation, marking the official beginning of apartheid. The National Party's platform was built on the promise of maintaining white supremacy and ensuring the continued dominance of the white minority over the black majority. They passed a series of draconian laws designed to divide and dehumanize. These laws were meticulously crafted to ensure that every aspect of life in South Africa was segregated by race, from where people could live and work with whom they could marry and associate with. The population registration classified every citizen by race. This act was the foundation of the apartheid system. It required all South Africans to be registered and classified into one of four racial categories: white, black, coloured, and Indian. This classification determined every aspect of a person's life, from their access to education and employment to their ability to move freely within the country. The Group Areas Act segregated where people could live. This act designated specific areas for each racial group, forcibly removing people from their homes and relocating them to areas deemed appropriate for their race. Entire communities were uprooted and families were torn apart as the government sought to create a racially segregated society. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act outlawed interracial relationships. This act made it illegal for people of different races to marry or engage in romantic relationships, further entrenching the racial divide and ensuring that the white minority could maintain its purity and dominance. These laws were the building blocks of a system designed to oppress and control. The apartheid regime sought to maintain its power through a combination of legal measures, economic exploitation, and brutalism. The black majority was systematically disenfranchised, denied basic human rights, and subjected to constant surveillance and violence. The living conditions in the townships where black South Africans were forced to live were deplorable. Overcrowded and underdeveloped, these areas lacked basic infrastructure, sanitation. The government invested little in these communities, ensuring that the black population remained impoverished and dependent on the white minority for support. The past laws were another tool of oppression used by the apartheid regime. These laws required black South Africans to carry passports, which contained their personal information and details of their employment. Failure to produce a passport on demand could result in arrest and imprisonment. The pass laws restricted the movement of black South Africans, making it difficult for them to find work and maintain family connections. Despite the oppressive nature of the apartheid regime, resistance and defiance were ever present. The black population, along with some white allies, organized protests, strikes, and acts of civil disobedience. These acts of resistance were often met with brutal repression by the state, with police and military forces using violence to quell dissent. Prominent leaders emerged from the anti-apartheid movement, inspiring hope and galvanizing the oppressed population. Figures like Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, and many others became symbols of the struggle for freedom and equality. Their courage and determination in the face of immense adversity inspired a generation to continue the fight against apartheid. The international community also played a crucial role in the fight against apartheid. Protests, boycotts and sanctions were organized around the world, putting pressure on the South African government to end its oppressive policies. The global outcry against apartheid highlighted the moral and ethical bankruptcy of the regime, further isolating it on the world stage. The relentless pressure both within and outside South Africa eventually led to the dismantling of the apartheid system. In the early 1990s, the government began to repeal apartheid-era laws, and in 1994, Nelson Mandela was released from prison after 27 years of incarceration. His release marked the beginning of a new era for South Africa, one in which the dream of a free and equal society would finally be. In 1994, South Africa held its first democratic elections, in which people of all races participated. The African National Congress, led by Nelson Mandela, won a decisive victory, and Mandela became the country's first black president. This historic moment marked the end of apartheid and the beginning of a new chapter in South Africa's history. The end of apartheid was a moment of immense joy and relief for the people of South Africa. Celebrations erupted across the country as people rejoiced in their newfound freedom. Nelson Mandela's inauguration as president was a powerful symbol of the triumph of justice and equality over oppression and discrimination. The journey to rebuild and reconcile in the post-apartheid era has been challenging, but the spirit of resilience and hope remains strong. South Africa continues to grapple with the legacy of apartheid, working to address the deep-seated inequalities in the The nation's commitment to building a more just, inclusive society serves as a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Today, South Africa is a vibrant and diverse nation, rich in culture and history. The scars of apartheid are still visible, but the country's progress towards healing and unity is undeniable. The story of South Africa's struggle against apartheid is a powerful reminder of the importance of justice, equality, and the unyielding pursuit of freedom. At the heart of apartheid lay a toxic ideology of white supremacy. This ideology was not just a belief held by a few, but a systemic and institutionalized doctrine that permeated every level of society. It was propagated through state-sponsored propaganda, education and legislation, creating a deeply entrenched system of racial segregation and discrimination. Government, media and educational institutions all played a role in perpetuating the myth of white superiority, ensuring that it became a fundamental part of the national consciousness. This toxic belief system was used to justify the subjugation and exploitation of black South Africans, who were seen as inferior and unworthy of the same rights and privileges as their white counterparts. The ideology of white supremacy was not just a social construct, but a powerful tool of oppression that was used to maintain the status quo and keep the white minority in power. It was built on the lie that white South Africans were superior to black South Africans. This lie was perpetuated through a series of laws and policies that institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination. The Population Registration Act of 1950 classified South Africans into racial groups, and the Group Areas Act of 1950 designated specific areas for each racial group to live and work. These laws ensured that white South Africans had access to the best land, housing and employment opportunities, while black South Africans were confined to overcrowded and underdeveloped areas with limited resources and opportunities. The lie of white superiority was also reinforced through the education system, which was designed to provide white children with a high-quality education that prepared them for leadership roles, while black children received a substantial education that prepared them for meaningful. This system of racial segregation and discrimination was maintained through a combination of legal, economic and social mechanisms that ensured the continued development. This belief permeated every aspect of life, justifying the brutality and injustice of the regime. The apartheid government used a variety of tactics to maintain control and suppress dissent, including censorship, propaganda, and violence. The media was tightly controlled, and any criticism of the government or its policies was swiftly silenced. Propaganda was used to promote the idea of white superiority and to justify the harsh treatment of black South Africans. The government also used violence and intimidation to maintain control, with the police and military playing a key role in enforcing apartheid and suppressing opposition. Black South Africans who dared to challenge the system were met with brutal repression, including arbitrary arrests, detention without trial, torture, and even murder. The apartheid regime was willing to go to any lengths to maintain its grip on power, and the belief in white supremacy was used to justify the most egregious human rights abuses. Black South Africans were stripped of their citizenship and denied basic human rights. The apartheid government implemented a series of laws and policies that systematically disenfranchised black South Africans and stripped them of their rights. The Bantu Authorities Act of 1951 established separate tribal homelands, effectively stripping them of their citizenship and relegating them to second-class status. The past laws required black South Africans to carry out their protection documents at all times and restricted their movement, making it difficult for them to find work or access basic services. The government also implemented a series of laws that restricted the rights of black South Africans to own property, run businesses, or participate in the political process. These laws were designed to keep black South Africans in a state of perpetual poverty and dependence, ensuring that they remained subservient to the white minority. They were forced to live in segregated townships, often without access to basic services like electricity and running water. The Group Areas Act of 1950 designated specific areas for each racial group to live and work, and black South Africans were confined to overcrowded London townships. These townships were often located in communities and lacked basic infrastructure and services. Many black South Africans lived in makeshift huts. The government provided minimal funding for the development of these areas, ensuring that they remained in poverty. The living conditions in the townships were dire, with high levels of poverty, unemployment and disease. Despite these hardships, black South Africans showed incredible resilience and resourcefulness, building strong communities and supporting each other in the face of adversity. Education was segregated and unequal, designed to keep black South Africans in a position of subservience. The Bantu Education Act of 1953 established separate and unequal education systems. White children attended well-funded schools with modern facilities and highly qualified teachers, while black children attended underfunded schools with overcrowded classrooms and poorly trained teachers. The curriculum for black children was designed to prepare them for menial labour and to reinforce their subservient status. They were taught basic literacy and numeracy skills, but were denied access to higher education and vocational training. The apartheid government believed that black South Africans did not need a high-quality education, as they were destined to work in low-paying, unskilled jobs. This system of educational apartheid ensured that black South Africans remained economically and socially disadvantaged, with limited opportunities for upward mobility. They were relegated to menial jobs, paid less than their white counterparts, and denied economic opportunity. The apartheid government implemented a series of labour laws that restricted the rights of black South Africans to work in certain industries or hold certain positions. Black South Africans were often confined to low-paying, unskilled jobs in agriculture, mining and domestic service. They were paid significantly less than their white counterparts for the same work and were denied access to benefits such as healthcare, pensions and housing. The government also implemented a system of migrant labour, which required black South Africans to leave their families and communities to work in distant mines and farms. This system of labour exploitation ensured that black South Africans remained economically dependent on the white minority, with little hope of improving their living conditions. Despite these challenges, black South Africans organised and fought for better wages and working conditions, often facing brutal repression from the government. The system was ruthlessly enforced by a brutal police state. The apartheid government relied on a highly militarised police force to maintain control and suppress the system. The police were given broad powers to arrest, detain and interrogate anyone suspected of opposing. They used a variety of tactics to intimidate and terrorise black South Africans, including raids on homes and communities, arbitrary arrests and the use of excessive force. The police were also responsible for enforcing the pass laws, which required black South Africans to carry identification documents at all times and restricted their movement. Those who were found without proper documentation were often arrested and detained without trial. The police were notorious for using torture and other forms of violence to extract confessions and intimidate opponents. The apartheid government also established a network of informants and spies to monitor and report on the activities of black South Africans, creating a climate of fear and suspicion. Arbitrary arrests, detention without trial and torture. The apartheid government used a variety of laws and policies to suppress dissent and maintain control. The Suppression of Communism Act of 1950 and the Terrorism Act of 1967 gave the government broad powers to arrest and detain anyone suspected of opposing the regime. These laws were used to target anti-apartheid activists, trade unionists, and anyone else who posed a threat to them. Those who were arrested were often held in detention without trial for extended periods of time and were subjected to torture and other forms of ill treatment. The government also used a system of banning orders to restrict the activities of opponents, preventing them from speaking out or organising against the regime. The use of arbitrary arrests, detention without trial and torture created a climate of fear and repression, making it difficult for black South Africans to resist the voice of dissent was silenced, and any form of opposition was met with swift and brutal repression. The apartheid government used a variety of tactics to suppress opposition and maintain control. Anti-apartheid activists were often arrested, detained and tortured, and many were killed. The government also used censorship and propaganda to control the flow of information and to promote its own narrative. The media was tightly controlled, and any criticism of the government was swiftly silenced. The government also used a system of informants and spies to monitor and report on the activities of opponents, creating a climate of fear and suspicion. Despite these challenges, black South Africans continued to resist the apartheid system, organising protests, strikes, and other forms of civil disobedience. The struggle for freedom and equality was long and difficult. Ultimately, the resilience and determination of black South Africans prevailed, leading to the dismantling of the apartheid system and the establishment of a democratic South Africa. Imagine carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Not just for a moment, but every single day of your life. This was the daily reality for black South Africans living under apartheid. The oppressive system of racial segregation and discrimination that lasted from 1948 to 1994 was not just a political regime, it was a daily, lived experience that permeated every aspect of life. The weight was not just physical, but emotional and psychological. A burden that was felt in every breath, every step and every interaction. This was the daily reality for black South Africans living under apartheid. The system was designed to enforce racial segregation and economic disparity, ensuring that black South Africans remained at the bottom of the social ladder. Overcrowded townships were a stark reminder of the systemic inequality. These areas were often underdeveloped, lacking basic amenities such as clean water, electricity and proper sanitation. Families were crammed into small, makeshift homes with little to no privacy or comfort. The townships were a physical manifestation of the apartheid regime's disregard for black lives. Every aspect of their lives was controlled, dictated by the colour of their skin. Segregation was enforced in public spaces, from schools and hospitals to parks and beaches. Signs declaring whites only or non-whites were a constant reminder of the racial division. The apartheid laws were meticulously crafted to ensure spirit of resilience and resistance was evident in the way people navigated their daily lives, finding moments of joy and connection amidst the oppression, a place determined by a system designed to dehumanize and oppress. The apartheid regime used propaganda to justify its policies, portraying black South Africans as inferior and dangerous. This dehumanization was a key component of the system, making it easier for the state to enforce its brutal law. The police and military were given extensive powers to maintain order, often using violence and intimidation to suppress dissent. The constant presence of armed forces in black communities created an atmosphere of fear and mistrust, further entrenching the divisions created by apartheid. The past laws, a cornerstone of apartheid, restricted their movement. These laws required black South Africans to carry passbooks, also known as dompas, at all times. The passbooks contained personal information, including employment details and permission to be in certain areas. Failure to produce a passbook on demand could result in arrest, detention, or even violence. The pass laws were a tool of control, limiting the freedom of movement and reinforcing the racial divide. They were a constant reminder of the state's power over black lives. Black South Africans were required to carry passbooks at all times, documenting their right to be in certain areas. The passbooks were not just a bureaucratic requirement, they were a symbol of the apartheid regime's control over every aspect of life. The process of obtaining and renewing a passport was often humiliating and demeaning, involving long waits and invasive questioning. The pass laws also had a profound impact on families, as men were often forced to live away from their homes in order to find work, leading to the breakdown of family structures and communities. Failure to produce these documents could lead to arrest, detention, or arrest. The fear of being stopped and questioned by the police was a constant presence in the lives of black South Africans. Detention cells were often overcrowded and unsanitary, with detainees facing harsh treatment. The legal system was heavily biased against black South Africans, with many facing long sentences and the threat of violence and imprisonment was a tool used by the state to maintain control and suppress resistance. Imagine living with the constant fear of being stopped, questioned, the psychological toll of this constant surveillance and control was immense. The fear of being targeted by the police affected every aspect of life, from the way people moved through public spaces to the way they interacted with each other. The humiliation of being treated as a second-class citizen, of having to prove one's right to exist in certain spaces, was a daily reality. This constant stress and anxiety had a profound impact on mental health, leading to high levels of psychological distress and trauma. The psychological toll of living under such a system was immeasurable. The constant fear and stress took a heavy toll on mental health, leading to widespread anxiety, depression, and other psychological issues. The trauma of living under apartheid was not just an individual experience, but a collective one, affecting entire communities. The legacy of this trauma continues to be felt today as South Africa grapples with the long-term effects of apartheid on mental health and well-being. Despite the immense challenges, black South Africans found ways to cope and resist, drawing on their cultural and spiritual resources to maintain their sense of identity and dignity. But despite the hardships, the human spirit endured. The resistance to apartheid was not just a political struggle, but a deeply personal one, rooted in the desire for dignity, freedom, and justice. Black South Africans organized and mobilized, forming resistance movements and engaging in acts of defiance. From the defiance campaign of the 1950s to the Soweto uprising of 1976, the struggle against apartheid was marked by courage and resilience. The international community also played a role, with global movements calling for sanctions and boycotts against the apartheid regime. The eventual dismantling of apartheid in the early 1990s was a testament to the power of collective action and the enduring human spirit. The legacy of this struggle continues to inspire movements for justice and equality around the world. Section 5, A Land Divided. In this chapter, we delve into the harrowing history of a nation torn apart by a system designed to segregate, oppress, and dehumanize. The story of apartheid in South Africa is not just a tale of racial segregation, it is a narrative of land dispossession, forced removals, and the systematic destruction of communities. Apartheid was more than just a system of racial segregation, it was a comprehensive and calculated strategy to control and marginalize the black population. The architects of apartheid sought to create a society where racial lines were rigidly enforced and the privileges of the white minority were maintained at all costs. This system permeated every aspect of life, from education and employment to housing and healthcare. At the heart of apartheid was a system of land dispossession. The land, a source of identity, livelihood, and heritage for black South Africans, was systematically taken away. Families who had lived on their ancestral lands for generations were forcibly removed, their homes demolished, and their communities scattered. This was not just a physical displacement, but a profound psychological and cultural dislocation. The Natives Land Act of 1913, a precursor to apartheid, restricted black South Africans from owning land in most of the country. This act was one of the first legal steps in a long process of dispossession. It confined black South Africans to just 7% of the land, despite them making up the majority of the population. This legislation laid the groundwork for the more extensive and brutal policies that would follow under apartheid. This act, along with subsequent legislation, forcibly removed millions of black South Africans from their ancestral lands. The Group Areas Act of 1950 further entrenched these policies, designating specific areas for different racial groups and leading to the mass eviction of black families from urban areas. These removals were often carried out with little warning and no compensation, leaving families destitute and homeless. They were displaced to overcrowded and underdeveloped areas designated as homelands or Bantustans. These areas were deliberately chosen for their poor soil and lack of resources, ensuring that the black population would remain economically dependent on the white-controlled state. The Bantustans were a key part of the apartheid strategy, designed to fragment the black population and prevent any unified resistance. These homelands were nothing more than overcrowded and impoverished reserves, lacking basic infrastructure and economic opportunities. Schools were underfunded, healthcare was inadequate, and employment opportunities were scarce. The living conditions in these areas were dire, with many families living in makeshift shelters without access to clean water or sanitation. The Bantustans were a stark contrast to the affluent white neighborhoods, highlighting the deep inequalities of the apartheid system. They were a cynical attempt to create a geographically and politically fragmented black population. By dividing the black population into separate homelands, the apartheid regime hoped to weaken any potential resistance and maintain control. The Bantustans were presented as independent states, but in reality they were puppet regimes, entirely dependent on the South African government. This fragmentation made it difficult for black South Africans to organize and fight against the oppressive system. The forced removals shattered communities, tore families apart, and left deep scars on the social fabric of South Africa. Entire neighborhoods were demolished, and the sense of community that had been built over generations was destroyed. Families were often separated, with parents sent to work in urban areas, while children and the elderly were left behind in the Bantustans. This separation had a devastating impact on family structures and social cohesion. It was a brutal reminder of the true cost of apartheid, the systematic dispossession and dehumanization of an entire people. The policies of apartheid were designed to strip black South Africans of their dignity, their rights, and their humanity. The legacy of these policies is still felt today, with deep economic and social inequalities persisting in South Africa. The story of apartheid is a stark reminder of the dangers of racial discrimination and the importance of fighting for justice and equality. Despite the oppressive nature of the apartheid regime, the spirit of resistance among black South Africans never wavered. From the early days of apartheid, there were those who stood up against the injustices and fought for their rights. The African National Congress, ANC, and other liberation movements played a crucial role in mobilizing the masses and challenging the apartheid state. Leaders like Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, and Walter Sisulu became symbols of the struggle for freedom and equality. The struggle for freedom was not without its sacrifices. The Sharpeville massacre of 1960, where police opened fire on peaceful protesters, killing 69 people, was a turning point in the anti-apartheid movement. This brutal act of violence drew international condemnation and highlighted the ruthless nature of the apartheid regime. It also galvanized the resistance, leading to increased support for the liberation movements and a renewed determination to end apartheid. The Soweto uprising of 1976 was another pivotal moment in the struggle against apartheid. Thousands of students took to the streets to protest against the imposition of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction in schools. The police responded with brutal force, killing hundreds of students and injuring many more. The images of young people standing up against the oppressive regime captured the world's attention and intensified the call for an end to apartheid. The international community played a significant role in the fight against apartheid. Anti-apartheid movements around the world organized protests, boycotts, and campaigns to pressure the South African government to end its racist policies. Countries imposed economic sanctions, and international organizations condemned the apartheid regime. The global solidarity movement was instrumental in isolating the South African government and supporting the internal resistance. The relentless struggle and international pressure eventually led to the dismantling of the apartheid system. In 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison after 27 years, marking the beginning of the end of apartheid. His release was met with jubilation and hope as it signaled a new era for South Africa. The negotiations that followed paved the way for the country's first democratic elections in 1994, where Mandela was elected as the first black president of South Africa. The end of apartheid was not the end of the struggle. The new democratic South Africa faced the enormous task of addressing the injustices of the past and building a more equitable society. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, was established to uncover the truth about human rights violations during apartheid and promote healing and reconciliation. The process was painful but necessary, as it allowed the nation to confront its past and begin the journey towards healing. Today, South Africa continues to grapple with the legacy of apartheid. While significant progress has been made in terms of political freedom and representation, deep economic and social inequalities persist. The scars of apartheid are still visible in the form of poverty, unemployment, and unequal access to education and healthcare. The journey towards true equality and justice is ongoing, and the lessons of the past serve as a reminder of the importance of vigilance and perseverance in the fight for human rights. The future of South Africa lies in the hands of its youth. The new generation, born after the end of apartheid, carries the hopes and dreams of a nation striving for a better future. Community initiatives and grassroots movements are working tirelessly to address the challenges and build a more inclusive and just society. The resilience and determination of the South African people continue to inspire as they work towards a future where the wounds of the past are healed and the promise of equality is fulfilled. The legacy of leaders like Nelson Mandela, who dedicated their lives to the struggle for freedom and justice, serves as a guiding light for the nation. Their vision of a South Africa where all people are treated with dignity and respect remains a powerful force for change. As the country moves forward, the lessons of the past and the sacrifices of those who fought for freedom will continue to shape its path towards a brighter and more equitable future. A land divided is a story of pain and resilience, of oppression and resistance, of division and unity. It is a reminder of the enduring human spirit and the power of collective action in the face of injustice. As South Africa continues its journey towards healing and reconciliation, the lessons of its past will guide its steps towards a future where all its people can live in peace, equality, and harmony. Section 6. The Colour of Oppression. The term apartheid is derived from the Afrikaans word meaning apartness. and it was a policy of racial segregation and discrimination enforced by the National Party government of South Africa from 1948 until the early 1990s. This system was designed to maintain white domination while extending racial separation. But apartheid wasn't just a policy, it was a lived experience that permeated every aspect of life for black South Africans. Apartheid wasn't just a policy, it was a lived experience. It was the daily reality of being segregated into different schools, hospitals and even public restrooms. Black South Africans were forced to use separate, often inferior facilities, a constant reminder of their second-class status. The signs that read whites only and non-whites only were not just markers of segregation, but symbols of a deeply entrenched system of racial oppression. It was the humiliation of being treated as inferior. Imagine walking down the street and being forced to step aside for a white person, or being addressed in a demeaning manner simply because of the colour of your skin. This daily degradation was a tool of oppression designed to break the spirit and enforce a sense of inferiority among black South Africans. It was the fear of being stopped and harassed by the police for no reason other than the colour of your skin. The police were a constant presence, patrolling the streets and enforcing the apartheid laws with brutal efficiency. Black South Africans lived in a state of perpetual fear, knowing that at any moment they could be stopped, searched and detained without cause. This fear was not just about physical harm, but also about the psychological trauma of being constantly surveilled and controlled. It was the anguish of families torn apart by forced removals. The apartheid government implemented policies that forcibly relocated black South Africans from their homes in urban areas to designated homelands or townships. These removals were often carried out with little warning and no regard for the well-being of the affected families. Homes were demolished, communities were destroyed, and lives were uprooted, all in the name of maintaining racial purity and control. It was the despair of seeing your dreams crushed by a system designed to control them. Black South Africans were required to carry passbooks, which were essentially internal passports that restricted their movement and employment opportunities. These passbooks had to be presented on demand, and failure to produce them could result in arrest and imprisonment. The pass laws were a tool of economic and social control, ensuring that black South Africans remained in a state of perpetual subjugation. It was the constant struggle for dignity and recognition in a land that treated you as a second-class citizen. Despite the overwhelming odds, black South Africans resisted the dehumanizing effects of apartheid. They organized protests, strikes and boycotts, demanding equal rights and an end to racial discrimination. The townships, though overcrowded and impoverished, became centers of resistance and resilience where the spirit of defiance was kept alive. But even in the face of such adversity, the human spirit found ways to resist. The anti-apartheid movement was a testament to the power of collective action and the unyielding desire for freedom and justice. Activists from all walks of life came together to challenge the apartheid regime, risking their lives and livelihoods in the process. Their courage and determination inspired a global movement against racial injustice. Music became a weapon, a way to express the pain, the anger, and the hope. In the face of oppression, music provided a means of resistance and a source of solace. Traditional South African music, with its rich rhythms and powerful lyrics, became a form of protest, a way to communicate the struggles and aspirations of the oppressed. Street musicians and performers used their art to inspire and mobilize the masses, turning music into a powerful tool for social change. Artists like and Hugh Masekela gave voice to the voiceless, their music echoing the struggles and aspirations of millions. Makiba, known as Mama Africa, used her international platform to speak out against apartheid, while Masekela's trumpet became a symbol of resistance. Their music not only entertained but struggle against racial injustice. Their speeches and performances at international rallies and concerts drew attention to the horrors of apartheid and inspired people around the world to take action. Through their tireless efforts, they helped to build a global movement that ultimately contributed to the dismantling of the apartheid regime and the establishment of a democratic South Africa. Section 7. A glimpse into the abyss. The history of South Africa is marred by a period of intense racial segregation and discrimination known as apartheid. This system, which lasted from 1948 until the early 1990s, was characterized by the institutionalized oppression of the non-white population by the white minority government. The policies of apartheid were designed to maintain white supremacy and control over the country's economic and social system. The impact of these policies was felt deeply by millions of South Africans who were subjected to severe restrictions on their freedom, movement and opportunity. The Sharpeville massacre, marked by the first 1960, offered a chilling glimpse into the brutality of the apartheid. This tragic event took place in the township of Sharpeville, where a large group of black South Africans had gathered to protest against the policy. These laws required black South Africans to carry which restricted their movement and access to certain land. Protesters organized by Pan-Africanist Congress, ANC, a regular group from the African National Congress, ANC, which sought to challenge the oppressive policies through peacefully. On that day, police opened fire on peaceful protests against the policy, killing 69 unarmed demonstrators, many shot in the back or fled. The protesters, who were unarmed and had gathered peacefully, were met with brutal force by the police. The police claimed that they were acting in self-defense, but eyewitness accounts and subsequent investigation revealed that the protesters posed no threat. The majority of the victims were shot in the back as they tried to escape the gunfire, highlighting the indiscriminate and excessive use of force by the authorities. The Sharpeville massacre sent shockwaves throughout South Africa and the world. News of the massacre spread rapidly, and the international community was horrified by the brutality of the apartheid regime. The images and reports of the massacre were broadcast globally, drawing widespread condemnation and outrage. In South Africa, the massacre had a profound impact on the anti-apartheid movement, galvanizing activists and ordinary citizens to intensify their efforts to challenge the oppressive system. It shattered any illusions about the true nature of the apartheid program and galvanized international attention. The massacre exposed the violent and oppressive nature of the apartheid program, leaving no doubt about the criminal and racial editorials and opinion pieces in newspapers around the world condemned the actions of the South African government, calling for an end to the international community, including governments, organizations and individuals, began to take a more active stance against apartheid, leading to increased pressure on the South African government to reform. The massacre also marked a turning point in the struggle against apartheid. In the wake of the Sharpeville massacre, the anti-apartheid movement gained new momentum and support. Protests and demonstrations erupted across South Africa, with people from all walks of life joining the fight against the oppressive regime. The massacre also led to a significant shift in the strategy of anti-apartheid authorities, as they recognized the need for more assertive and confrontational tactics to challenge the government's regime. The African National Congress, or ANC, previously committed to non-violent resistance, adopted armed struggle as a means to fight the oppressive regime. The Sharpeville massacre was a catalyst for the ANC to reconsider its approach to resistance. The organization's leaders, including Nelson Mandela, concluded that non-violent methods alone were insufficient to bring about meaningful change. As a result, the ANC established its armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, to carry out acts of sabotage and armed resistance against the apartheid government. This marked a significant escalation in the struggle for freedom and justice in South Africa. The world watched in horror as the images of the massacre The international community, including governments, human rights organizations, and citizens, rallied in support of the anti-apartheid movement, calling for an end to the systemic oppression and violence in South Africa. The brutality of the apartheid regime was exposed for all to see, and the international community could no longer ignore the cries for justice and equality. The Sharpeville massacre served as a stark reminder of the inhumanity of apartheid and the urgent need for change. The global outcry and condemnation of the massacre put significant pressure on the South African government, leading to increased isolation and silence. The massacre also inspired a new generation of activists and leaders who were determined to continue the fight for freedom, justice and equality in South Africa. The legacy of the Sharpeville massacre remains a powerful symbol of resistance and a reminder of the sacrifices made in the struggle against apartheid. Section 8. The Seeds of Resistance. In the heart of South Africa, a land rich in culture and history, a dark chapter unfolded that would test the resilience and spirit of its people. Apartheid, a system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination, sought to divide and conquer. But within this oppressive regime, the seeds of resistance were sown, nurtured by the courage and determination of countless individuals. Despite the ever-present threat of violence and repression, the spirit of resistance never died in South Africa. The streets of townships echoed with the cries for freedom, and the walls were adorned with graffiti that spoke of hope and defiance. The police, armed and ready to quash any sign of dissent, often clashed with protesters who refused to be silenced. These confrontations were not just physical battles, but symbolic ones, representing the unyielding will of a people yearning for justice. From the very beginning, brave individuals and organizations rose up to challenge the injustices of apartheid. These early activists, often at great personal risk, laid the groundwork for a movement that would grow in strength and numbers. They organized meetings, distributed pamphlets, and held protests, each one protesting for the unwavering commitment. The African National Congress, ANC, was at the forefront of the struggle, its members united by a shared vision of freedom and justice. The ANC, founded in 1912, became the leading voice of opposition, advocating for equal rights and an end to segregation. Its founding members, driven by a deep sense of justice, sought to create a platform where the oppressed could rally together. Over the years, the ANC's message resonated with more and more South Africans, transcending racial and ethnic divides. Their rallies became a beacon of hope, drawing people from all walks of life who were united in their desire for change. Leaders like Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and Oliver Tambo emerged as powerful symbols of resistance. Their names became synonymous with the struggle for freedom, their speeches inspiring countless others to join the cause. Mandela, with his unwavering resolve and charismatic leadership, became a global icon of resistance. Sisulu, a master strategist, played a crucial role in organizing the movement's efforts. Tambo, with his diplomatic skills, garnered international support, highlighting the global significance of their fight. They organized protests, strikes, and acts of civil disobedience, challenging the very foundations of the apartheid state. These actions were not without consequence. Many were arrested, beaten, or even killed. Yet the resolve of the movement only grew stronger. Each protest, each strike was a statement of defiance, a declaration that the people of South Africa would not be cowed by oppression. The streets became battlegrounds, not just of physical confrontation, but of ideologies, where the dream of freedom clashed with the harsh reality of apartheid. The struggle took on many forms, from clandestine underground operations to open defiance of unjust laws. In the shadows, resistance fighters planned and executed operations that struck at the heart of the apartheid regime. Secret meetings were held in basements and backrooms, where strategies were devised and information was shared. Pamphlets and literature often distributed to spread the message of resistance from the These underground efforts were documented by pamphlets and defiance, where individuals graffiti on a wall, a protest march through the streets, a strike at a factory. Each act was a blow against the system. These actions, though seemingly isolated, were part of a larger tapestry of resistance that spanned the country. They demonstrated that the spirit of defiance was alive and well, and that the people of South Africa would not rest until they had achieved their freedom. They showed the world that the human spirit could not be broken, even in the face of overwhelming oppression. International solidarity marches were held in cities around the globe as people from all nations stood in support of the South African struggle. These global demonstrations highlighted the universal nature of the fight against apartheid, showing that the desire for justice and equality transcends borders. The resilience of the anti-apartheid activists became a source of inspiration for movements worldwide, proving that even the most entrenched systems of oppression could be challenged and ultimately dismantled. The seeds of resistance planted in the early days of apartheid grew into a powerful movement that would eventually bring about the end of the regime. The journey was long and fraught with challenges, but the unwavering determination of the South African people ensured that their voices would be heard. The legacy of their struggle serves as a reminder that the fight for justice is never in vain, and that even in the darkest of times the human spirit can shine through. As we reflect on this chapter of history, we are reminded of the importance of standing up against injustice, no matter the cost. The story of the anti-apartheid movement is not just a tale of resistance, but a testament to the power of unity, courage, and unwavering. It is a story that continues to inspire and resonate with people, reminding us that the seeds of resistance are sown and will reinforce the people's lives. Section 9. A Global Struggle. The struggle against apartheid was not confined to the borders of South Africa. It resonated with people around the world who were outraged by the injustice and brutality of racial segregation. International pressure began to mount, with calls for sanctions and boycotts against the apartheid regime. Musicians, artists, and activists from all corners of the globe joined the fight, lending their voices and platforms to the cause. The United Nations condemned apartheid as a crime against humanity and imposed an arms embargo on South Africa. Sporting events were boycotted, and South Africa was isolated from the international community. The global anti-apartheid movement became a powerful force, putting immense pressure on the South African government to change its ways. It was a testament to the power of solidarity and the belief in a common humanity. Section 10. The Legacy of Apartheid. The term apartheid is derived from the Afrikaans word meaning apartness, and it was a policy of racial segregation and economic discrimination against non-whites in South Africa. This system was officially implemented by the National Party government in 1948, but its roots can be traced back to colonial times. The apartheid regime created a society where the rights and privileges of individuals were determined solely by their race, leading to widespread inequality and suffering. The story of apartheid is not just a historical footnote. It is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked prejudice and the corrosive effects of racial hatred. Under apartheid, the South African government enforced policies that separated people into racial groups: white, black, coloured, and Indian. Each group had different rights and privileges, with the white minority enjoying the most benefits. Public facilities, schools, and even neighbourhoods were segregated, and interracial marriages were prohibited. The government used a variety of laws to maintain this system, including the Population Registration Act, which required all South Africans to be classified by race, and the Group Areas Act, which designated specific areas where each racial group could live and work. It is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked prejudice and the corrosive effects of racial hatred. The apartheid regime was characterized by brutal repression and violence. The government used the police and military to enforce its policies, often resorting to extreme measures to suppress dissent. Peaceful protests were met with tear gas, rubber bullets, and even live ammunition. Many anti-apartheid activists were arrested, tortured and killed. The Sharpeville massacre in 1960, where police opened fire on a crowd of unarmed protesters, killing 69 people, is one of the most infamous examples of the regime's brutality. The Soweto uprising in 1976, the students The scars of apartheid still run deep in South African society, a testament to the enduring legacy of this brutal system. The economic and social disparities created by apartheid continue to affect the lives of millions of South Africans. Many black South Africans still live in poverty, with limited access to quality education, healthcare, and employment opportunities. The townships, which were originally established to house black workers near urban areas, remain some of the most impoverished and underdeveloped parts of the country. The legacy of apartheid is also evident in the deep-seated racial tensions that persist in South African society. While the country has made significant progress in promoting racial reconciliation and equality, the wounds of the past have not fully healed, but it is also a story of resilience, courage, and the triumph of the human spirit over adversity. The struggle against apartheid was led by a diverse coalition of individuals and organizations, both within South Africa and around the world. Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison for his anti-apartheid activities, became a global symbol of resistance and hope. Other prominent figures such as Desmond Tutu, Steve Biko, and Walter Sisulu also played crucial roles in the fight for freedom and justice. The African National Congress, ANC, the main political organization opposing apartheid, worked tirelessly to mobilize support and raise awareness about the injustices of the regime. International solidarity, including economic sanctions and cultural boycotts, also played a key role in putting pressure on the South African government to dismantle apartheid. The dismantling of apartheid stands as a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of resistance and the unwavering belief in equality and justice. The process of dismantling apartheid was long and arduous, involving negotiations, compromises, and moments of intense conflict. The release of Nelson Mandela in 1990 marked a turning point in the struggle, signalling the beginning of the end for the apartheid regime. In 1994, South Africa held its first democratic elections, in which people of all races were allowed to vote. The ANC won a decisive victory, and Nelson Mandela became the country's first black president. The transition to democracy was not without its challenges, but it represented a significant step forward in the quest for a more just and equitable society. The story of South Africa's journey from apartheid to democracy is a valuable lesson for us. It teaches us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, change is possible. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, established in 1995, played a crucial role in helping the country come to terms with its past. The TRC provided a platform for victims of human rights abuses to share their stories and seek justice, while also offering amnesty to perpetrators who were willing to confess their crimes. This process of truth-telling and reconciliation was essential in promoting healing and forgiveness, and it set an example for other countries grappling with their own histories of violence and oppression. It teaches us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, change is possible. The end of apartheid and the establishment of a democratic South Africa were the result of years of struggle, sacrifice, and perseverance. The country's leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens demonstrated incredible courage and determination in the face of adversity. Their efforts remind us that the fight for justice and equality is a continuous process, requiring constant vigilance and a commitment to building a more just and equitable world for all. The lessons of South Africa's journey are particularly relevant today, as we continue to confront issues of racism, inequality, and injustice in our own societies. It reminds us that the fight for justice and equality is a continuous process, requiring constant vigilance and a commitment to building a more just and equitable world for all. The legacy of apartheid serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up against injustice and working towards a more inclusive and equitable society. While While South Africa has made significant progress since the end of apartheid, there is still much work to be done. The country continues to face challenges such as economic inequality, unemployment and social unrest. However, the resilience and determination of the South African people give hope for a brighter future. By learning from the past and continuing to strive for justice and equality, we can build a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect regardless of race, ethnicity or